Let me start with some introduction. So this is the first seminar in this year from the series of ERSA seminars on economics of industrial organization and digital transformation. Anybody that would like to present something during this seminars is welcome to contact me. We need speakers, and especially we want speakers from South Africa. There will be possibly also speakers from elsewhere, but of course, having South African speakers and audience is the preference. So, as I said, this is the first seminar. There will be others coming, as well as some trainings. So for this, please follow up on the website, and there will be also a mailing. So there will be training in industrial organization and microeconomics online. Anybody is welcome to attend.
Thanks so much for the call, hey?
And
all right, cheers, goodbye.
Okay, coming back to the seminar, so I would like to thank Petrus for being willing to present this paper. As I understand, it's on blockchain. The rule is we have 45 minutes for presentation and 15 minutes for any questions and answers. So welcome everybody, and Petrus, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Łukasz, for the opportunity. So I think it's a really excellent topic for a seminar series, and I would love to attend more of these events. So I'm starting my attending by presenting, which is a bit presumptuous, but I'm talking about the topic which I think should be of interest to everyone. So I'm talking on a paper that we have currently under review at the Journal of Industrial Economics on uncertainty and dispute resolution for blockchain and smart contract institutions. If you see me looking to the side, it's because I have some faces on my slides in front of me, so sometimes I have to look to the right to see the full slide. So this is joint work with Bronwyn Howell of Victoria University in Wellington. I'm at the Department of Decision Sciences at UNISA. We are a traditionally operations research department, and we're in the School of Economic and Financial Sciences, very interdisciplinary. So if you'd like to connect with us, I warmly encourage it. Bronwyn and I both publish some of our research through the Institute for Technology and Network Economics, and we are associate researchers at Strand Consult, which does a lot of work on telecommunications regulation and technology regulation in general. So I'm going to talk about smart contracts, how that fits into the general view of contracts, and I'm going to go a little bit into the details of how this fits together in a blockchain infrastructure. I'll tell you everything that you need to know about that in the background slides. So in our authorship, I'm usually the slightly more technical person, and Bronwyn is very strong on governance and economics. So if I slip up on that, that is entirely my mistake and not Bronwyn's. So I condensed the presentation for today quite a bit because I would love some discussion about it. I'm not that familiar with Zoom, so I'm going to count on Łukasz. If you want to interrupt me for questions that appear or hands are up, please go ahead. So what we're going to need is to just for everybody to agree what the blockchain is. So I think a lot of people are perhaps bored with the topic, but let's just say that the blockchain is a shared general purpose ledger. So it's a document to which you can just add at the end. It is linear and it is easy to maintain. That is the chain part of it. So what happens when you start to use a blockchain? Well, you can use it without having a copy of it, but if you want to properly use it, you've got to go to some website and install the appropriate software, and then connect on your own computer, and then connect to all of the other computers that are doing this. So I'd like us to just reflect very quickly on what that means. So that means that you have somehow heard what the authoritative source of the software is for looking at this specific blockchain. You trust the software that you download. You can put it on your computer. You don't need anybody's permission. And in the case of the Bitcoin blockchain, for example, you need to download a couple of 100 gigabytes of data to have a full copy of it. So this is not an impossible task. I've just done it on my home computer, for example. It's not really a problem. So in this infrastructure of the blockchain, there's what I indicated here is already a kind of social consensus. So we agree on what the source is, and let me just for shorthand talk about Bitcoin. We agree what the source is for the authoritative Bitcoin software, and we download it and we connect to some servers. Then there's a lot of mathematics and software involved. There's a lot of talk about regulation, but you cannot ban mathematics and software, of course. And then it is quite decentralized, so there's no single source of it. So the source of a copy of the blockchain or the general ledger is simply anybody who actually has one. This is already quite big. So the blockchain itself is not necessarily such a big file or database, but its use, the widespread use of it, you can judge from the following fact. So at the recent peak in the blockchain price, the value of all blockchain in issue was equal to approximately 1/3 of the value of all dollar notes and coins in circulation. Okay, so that's and physical coins and notes. So that gives you an idea of how widespread these things are. And if you'd like to store something for a long time reliably, I would say that the expensive and very reliable way to do it is to put it on the Bitcoin blockchain. So you can put transactions on the blockchain, but you can also just put any kind of data on it. And in fact, you can also put software on it. And that's something that we call smart contracts. So before I look at the slide, so what is a smart contract? A smart contract is a piece of software that gets executed on the blockchain. Typically, this is on the Ethereum blockchain. And what does this actually mean? So what this means is that as the general ledger gets processed, so as you add on to the end of the ledger, some of what gets added on is actually the execution of a piece of software. So this is a piece of software that's written in a specific language. The software itself is stored on the blockchain. And when everybody adds a bit to the blockchain, they possibly add another step in the running of the software. So if you are old enough to remember, in the old days, we used to learn programming at school by executing software on pieces of paper. So you used to write down the state of the machine in one step, and then the state in the next step, and so on. That was a full run of execution of the software. And this is in fact exactly what happens with a smart contract. So the different steps in the execution are stored on the blockchain and are 100% verifiable. So this is of course a bit slow, so you don't want to compute anything intensively there, although the programming languages that we use on the blockchain are all general purpose programming languages that you have in smart contracts. And the smart contracts can in fact execute anything. Okay. So this is simply a smart contract is simply a specific kind of software sitting on a blockchain system. So what are the advantages of this? Well, one of the advantages are that it's just executing on the blockchain. So once you've started it, nobody can really stop it. So there's no way of court stopping the execution of a piece of software on the Ethereum or Bitcoin blockchain. And then there's the ability to bypass the need for certain kind of legal services. So this is where a lot of interest started in this. So to give you an idea, the kind of legal service that you can bypass through a smart contract is an escrow or a trustee account type function. So you can store a value on the blockchain in terms, of course, of that blockchain's cryptocurrency, and then you can have authorized parties sending signals to release this. I have a friend, for example, who has quite a bit of money on a specific cryptocurrency's blockchain. And he has a smart contract which requires the following. So it requires him to send a signal to the smart contract on a regular basis, say every week or every month. So that also happens on the blockchain. If he does not send the signal to the account or to the smart contract, then that smart contract automatically pays out the balance in a wallet in that cryptocurrency to his wife. So, or let's say to an address owned by his wife. So what is this? So this is in fact a will that lives as a smart contract on the blockchain. So the execution of the will doesn't require him to pass away. It simply requires him to stop sending the his wife controls the wallet in which it goes. So actually, this is a binding kind of agreement between him and his wife, because she already controls that wallet. He cannot stop executing, if he stops sending the signal to the smart contract, then the money in fact goes directly to his wife's wallet. There's no way that he can revoke this contract because it's executing on the blockchain. So it's in fact a much, much harder thing than an actual will. So the idea is that this kind of contract can be used to reduce the cost of many legal services, verification and enforcement, and be very conducive to cross-border transactions where there are multiple jurisdictions involved, or where one or more of the parties do not have access to a well-functioning and accessible legal system. So the governance of smart contracts is really the topic of this paper. So I'm going to skip over a lot of this discussion. We'll share the slides with you somehow, and the paper on which this is based, so that you can have access to these references should you wish. So the smart contract, as I've said already, is executing on a blockchain. It does require money to do this. So generally, a smart contract comes with a wallet or address in the blockchain system, and there has to be sufficient money deposited in that address for it to continue to execute. So what my friend can do, for example, so he can in fact, instead of doing the will that I have described on the blockchain, he can actually underfund the smart contract that executes that will. So if he's not so sure about leaving this cryptocurrency to his wife, he can in fact only fund that smart contract with a little bit of money. And then the contract will no longer execute if the pot of money for execution is dried up. Why is this the case? Well, everything on the blockchain costs you something. So you have to incentivize the people who maintain the blockchain and do the computations that are required to verify additions to it. And this is also true for the execution of a smart contract. So what can a smart contract do? Well, a smart contract can only do things on the blockchain on which it lives, or possibly on similar blockchains to which it can send the signal. It can also receive signals on the blockchain by receiving transactions that are addressed to it. So every participant in a blockchain has a public address which identifies them, and then a private key which signs transactions for that address. So this is important to note that this is again purely mathematical. So it's a little code that's your address, and then you have a corresponding code which you keep secret, which allows you to operate as that address. And with a smart contract, a lot of things can go wrong, of course, with any kind of arrangement, but not on the blockchain. Okay. So for example, in the case of my friend's will, he could simply forget to send a signal to the blockchain, or the internet in South Africa can go down for 2 weeks, and he might not be able to send the signal, and then have all the money deposited to his wife's wallet, and he might want to reverse that, but that's not possible because that smart contract is going to execute exactly as it is programmed on that specific blockchain. And in fact, smart contracts, like the blockchain itself, are designed to be inflexible. So inflexibility here is a feature and not a bug. What a smart contract is not is the following. It's not a silver bullet to solve all kinds of problems. So in fact, smart is a very bad word for it. It's not really smart at all. It's also not a contract in the sense that it's a legally binding agreement between juristic persons. So it is simply a piece of software that involves certain addresses on the blockchain. These addresses are not juristic persons. They might be controlled by juristic persons, but control of that address can be passed over to another person arbitrarily by simply sharing the secret key with them that controls that address. Smart contracts are also not a way of capturing a whole range of things that we do in everyday life. So that is the search for business partners, negotiating terms, recording agreements, etc., etc. So the things that are involved in normal human contracting do not happen in a smart contract. And it is also not a solution for misaligned incentives in the real world. So if people are not doing what they agreed to do in the real world, they can also do things that they did not agree to do in a smart contract. So there is no problem for that, no problem with that. Smart contracts, however, are good for a lot of things. So they can simplify some transactions and dispense with intermediaries. So say I wanted to send a package to Łukasz and he didn't trust me. So I'll tell him the package is on its way. And I might have somebody in Cape Town that I do trust, and or that we both know and trust, and then we'll just ask that person we can write a smart contract so that as soon as that person sends a signal, Łukasz's money comes to me, and we trust the person in Cape Town to check that and verify that he has actually received the package. So this is a kind of cheap escrow type event, which smart contracts are very good for. It can also, to a small degree, replace trust in intermediaries by trust in the code, because the code is verifiable and viewable by anybody on the blockchain. And of course, it provides a permanent and verifiable record of the execution of the agreement. So, very important part of actual real-world agreements, though, is incompleteness. And what we'll do, we'll look a little bit at incompleteness for normal contracts and agreements, and then see what the corresponding issues are for smart contracts. So what is a complete contract? So we use the definition of Williamson. So a contract is complete when all parties entering the contract are able to foresee all relevant contingencies that might arise, when they are able to describe these contingencies accurately and identify after the fact which contingency has occurred, and then also agree upon an efficient course of action for each possible contingency. The identification is, of course, on both sides. So both sides need to be able to identify the contingencies that might have arisen. And once such an agreement, complete contract is in place, both parties have to abide by its terms. Now, all contracts are incomplete. There's no doubt about that, and we know a lot of the reasons why this is the case. So there's the presence of asymmetric or imperfect information. I think you all know the wonderful article about the market for lemons from the early 70s, about the used car market. There's bounded rationality, so people might not actually want to do what is in their best interest. Opportunistic behavior, difficulties specifying or measuring performance, difficulties with enforcing performance with the terms of the contract, and the presence of transaction costs. So smart contracts can, to some degree, address some of these issues. They might be able to address some aspects of opportunistic behavior. For example, my friend's blockchain will actually prevents him from secretly changing his will. So if we can just consider that for a moment, suppose my friend were to fall out with his wife, he could, in the real world, change his will secretly. On the blockchain, he cannot change that smart contract. And the moment that he stops putting money to have the smart contract run, his wife will see that immediately. Okay? So this is a very nice way of occluding this kind of opportunistic way of behavior. And furthermore, smart contracts have the opportunity of facilitating a lot of cross-border transacting. I mean, a lot of what is going on in goods can be done quite effectively using blockchain type systems. And for this reason, the big logistics companies have all put quite a bit of money into developing blockchain-based systems to keep track of goods and shipments. Now, in which ways are smart contracts incomplete? Well, similar to normal contracts, smart contracts fail to be complete because no human or algorithm can foresee all contingencies that might arise in any situation. It is also true that we cannot foresee the unintended consequences that might arise from bad software. And I'll mention one recent example just now. So the limits of our human cognition, linguistic precision, and in fact, programming skills can make it equally impossible for us to describe all the contingencies accurately. So before smart contracts, there was something called electronic data interchange with a contracting technology in which the same problems were already apparent. So this is not something that is particularly new for smart contracts. Smart contracts are also incomplete because it's not always possible to observe all the contingencies that have actually occurred, because in a smart contract, smart contract, you'll be able to observe all the contingencies on the blockchain, but nothing else. Smart contracts might also not allow for agreement on all courses of action. And as far as abiding with the terms of the smart contract goes, that is only going to happen for those part of the contracts that execute on the blockchain, which is generally not the entire agreement. So if I'm sending something to Lukasz in Cape Town, and our common friend is going to verify that it has actually arrived and released the payment, that is, if Lukasz and my friend just agree not to do that, there's nothing that I can really do about that. So there's no way of enforcing that with a smart contract, as you might expect. So a recent spectacular example is with the Percent Finance cryptocurrency exchange, which actually published incorrect, so that's incorrect software contracts in November, locked about $1 million in cryptocurrencies into contracts that became unusable. So a lot of cryptocurrency exchanges, and that's actually a different topic, work on the basis of smart contracts. So what do you do on a cryptocurrency exchange if you are trading with parties that you don't know? So you're trading one cryptocurrency for another. And this is all very amenable through automation by smart contracts. So you just need a trusted party in the middle. So if I were trading some, let's say, Bitcoin for Monero with somebody in Mongolia, I need a trusted party in the middle to make sure that these two transactions are aligned. And this can be done by exchange smart contracts. But in fact, a simple programming error can have this kind of result. Okay, now, what are the institutional responses generally to contracting problems? Specifically, the responses to incompleteness. So incompleteness is so ridiculously common, I would say. Incompleteness and inconsistency, it's unbelievable. So I recently bought a new house, and on page 2 of the contract, it said that the occupational rent had to be paid pro rata in advance. Okay, so in advance of an unknown date. So this is a completely impossible thing to do. But in a case like that, the parties can simply just sit down and say, okay, sorry, this is a problem, and let's just renegotiate. So that is the first response, is renegotiation. The second is simply to fall back to reputation. So even if you have something in an agreement with a well-known company or entity, you can place some reliance on them behaving in a reasonable way, regardless of what the contract says. There's also relational contracting, to which I'll get later. Then there's very important for real-life contract is the reliance on contract law. So any agreement has behind it the contract law of that country, which specifies a lot of things and has a lot of jurisprudence behind that. So this is, of course, not true for smart contracts. And then arbitration processes, including the courts. So smart contracts have a real challenge to the extent that it's very difficult to find substitutes for these traditional responses to the incompleteness of contracts. So renegotiation generally by design is not possible for smart contracts. So we'll discuss a little bit later the extent to which some of it is possible. So that simply means that you have an incomplete contract that you make possible to layer extra agreements on that. And of course, as I've indicated, the code once running cannot be stopped, provided that it is actually funded. Reputation, so smart contracts do have an advantage when it comes to reputation to some extent, because the parties with which you contract will have some track record that's visible on the blockchain. So if I am trading cryptocurrency with a person in Mongolia, I might be able to see that that entity has successfully contracted a lot before, and because it's all visible on the blockchain, that might create a sense of reputation for them without me having to know anything about them. So there is an advantage there. However, trusting the code to deliver a predictable and intended outcome is not the same thing as trusting the integrity of those transacting on the blockchain. And I can just say that from a computer science point of view, any computer code is subject to failure. So it's only the most elementary software that can actually be effectively checked to comply with non-trivial requirements. And smart contracts can ensure performance of the agreed terms, but there's no special mechanism for general reputation and trust. So the view of relational contracts. So if we see a contract as rather part of a relationship between contracted parties rather than discrete transactions, it kind of makes more sense. So a lot of the time, a contract is kind of an expression of volition rather than very specific terms. And this avoids the high transaction cost of agreeing and specifying a vast range of contingencies and terms. So a relational contract in this sense differs very much from a spot contract where the parties interact only once. And in a spot contract, if you have no means of enforcement, that certainly becomes quite difficult anyway. And the typical example of such a contract is an employment contract where it's really very difficult to specify the outputs and expectations in advance, or any kind of principle-based regulation. And if we think back to the work of Ronald Coase about why companies exist at all. Companies exist at all because it is not really efficient to execute everything that you need to do using spot contracts. So if you would like to remember the following remark, it would be useful that all smart contracts are in fact spot contracts. So those are contracts for very, very brief relationship and so what about courts, law, and arbitration? So the contract law, as we've said, substantially reduces transaction costs for the reason that this is a well agreed on and well understood body of law and jurisprudence. And this kind of recourse to courts and arbitration is actually diametrically opposed to the principle of spot contracts. So the assumption is not that everything is ex ante specified and programmed into some kind of code when a normal agreement falls under court judgment or jurisdictions, although courts may adjudicate around smart contracts. And let me tell you how. So once again, in the case of my friend's will, if his wife notices that the money for executing the smart contract is running low, there's nothing preventing her from going to a normal court and saying that my husband and I have an agreement that he will fund this contract and he will fund this contract and he's not doing it. So dear court, please compel my husband to do so. And if he then does not comply with a court order, it's always possible to seek damages from him. Now, this would be to some extent counterproductive because part of the intention is, of course, to, let's say, move in a gray area with respect to inheritance taxes and so on. But there's nothing preventing a court to step in and forcing a party to a smart contract to perform whatever they have agreed to do. Okay, so two ways in which smart contracts can to some extent duplicate some of the infrastructure that supports normal contracts. So the one way is a system called Kleros for decentralized arbitration and dispute resolution. That is itself a smart contract that runs on the Ethereum blockchain. It's named Kleros because of the mechanism used in ancient Athens, which you see on the slide, which was used to randomly select jurors for certain cases. So they don't actually know exactly how this machine worked, but it spat out little tokens with the names or identifiers of jurors from those slots. So they used that to randomly choose jurors to hear disputes. And the Kleros system works like this. If you lodge a complaint with Kleros, then the parties to that complaint, if I remember correctly, have to pay a small deposit, and then the wheels start turning at Kleros. The Kleros smart contract has a portfolio of available jurors on whom it calls to possibly hear this dispute. Those jurors are then randomly selected, and if they wish to take part in this arbitration, they have to themselves deposit an amount of cryptocurrency. So that is the way that jurors, who of course we presume to be real persons, but could also be algorithms because they are only identified on the blockchain by their blockchain identifier. So let me emphasize that we don't know whether these Kleros jurors are algorithms or people. Then there's a decision-making algorithm that gets executed, and in general, this algorithm rewards the jurors for reaching a consensus. So if a juror is part then of the majority, or whichever way the decision algorithm works, opinion on a case, that juror will get their deposit back plus some money for taking part in the process. And the jurors who decide in a way that is determined by the algorithm to have been wrong will lose their deposit. So this is, of course, very cold-hearted and mechanical, but it's not a really a very problematic thing, I think. And of course, you can also, in principle, in a smart contract, program something that allows for the execution of various parts of the program of the contract to be stopped in case one of the designated parties refer a conflict to Kleros. So Kleros is, if you want, a kind of court for smart contracts that you can specify in the contract. It is going to cost you money, but far less than actually going to a real court is. It is really too early to say whether this is a popular or good idea. Certainly requires a lot of programming and a lot of thinking about this. And as an aside, if you're not looking at this kind of space, you might be surprised by the incredible amount of innovation that is going on in blockchain executable contracts and systems. So it's absolutely not the case that blockchain is a toy for people who speculate in that kind of market. There are lots of real applications and lots of people are doing at least very interesting and possibly quite valuable work in development on these systems. Another proposal for dealing with the problem of conflict in smart contracts is so-called self-driving contracts. So self-driving contracts is something which is in the conceptual phase. So the idea is that there will be some kind of artificial intelligence living on or off the blockchain, which will be able to make this Kleros type, court type decisions about smart contracts. And similar to designating Kleros as a dispute resolution mechanism in a smart contract, you might designate some self-driving contract business. And the idea is, of course, that this could become reliable and cheap. So I think we are quite far from this being the case, but there's certainly a lot of possible efficiency in using this kind of system. So if you drive around Sandton and you see the billion rand buildings of the big law firms, this should not come as a surprise. So these are two principal ways in which the problems of incompleteness in smart contracts are being addressed. And that is really what we looked at. So in conclusion, so at the moment, smart contracts are usable for this spot contract type of transaction. We don't think it's likely that it will be useful for highly complex transactions soon. And we see this because of our background as a little bit like the tension between ex-ante regulation and competition law. So ex-ante regulation means that you specify things before and then everybody can do whatever they want afterwards, whereas competition law is, of course, much more complex and can deal with a greater range of eventualities. And we know from, it's not unknown that the actual laws are quite difficult to encode. So we do not see a computerized replacement for the legal system. Even things as simple as speed limits are very difficult to automate. It's very difficult to automate the enforcement of that. And we do not believe right now in the quote entirely new paradigm, etc., of governance and management, unquote. It is not yet there, and we think it will be a substantial time before we see something like that. So thank you for your attention. As I said, I am sharing, I'll try to share that link with you in the chat if I can work out how Zoom text chat works, where you can download the complete paper, which is of course much longer in terms of content and includes all the references. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Petrus, for a very interesting presentation. We have some time for questions. So is there anybody who would like to ask any question? If so, please raise hand or just unmute yourself and ask the question.
So even something completely general, so people are welcome to ask anything related to smart contracts, or in fact how the blockchain operates. I prefer not to discuss the value of cryptocurrencies, but anything else, people are welcome. So I'm just going to, I found the chat, so I'm just going to share that link in the chat if I have it.
Right, maybe I ask questions. So the discussion which you have, these are so far mainly concepts, or it's something that's been already increasingly implemented?
So Clearos is working. I'm not sure to what extent it is being used. The self-driving contracts are still conceptual. The smart contracts are working. So, I mean, the simple smart contracts in terms of escrow, little things like that. I mean, you can write a smart contract this afternoon if you just follow the instructions to do any kind of computation that you like and have it execute on the blockchain. And there's also a lot of clever work. So you might have heard of Vitalik, I think his surname is Burin or something like that. So Vitalik is a developer of Ethereum. And he also, if I remember correctly, conceptualized the idea of a special programming language. So there are several programming languages that are developed specifically for blockchains. So this really is, from an intellectual point of view, a moderately mature environment already.
All right, thanks. Maybe one more question. So, so you mentioned a list of potential issues related to incompleteness of contracts that we know. And you listed these two solutions to help with this problem in case of smart contracts, right?
Yes.
But otherwise, so this is like, there may be other solutions, but otherwise smart contracts are essentially subject to the same problems that traditional contracts.
Oh, definitely. Plus, they are cast in stone, and there's not a clear court jurisdiction. So and because the execution is kind of mechanical, it can be even more problematic. And the parties involved, so if you have a smart contract and the parties involved are always blockchain identities that are specified in the contract. I mean, there are no names in it, okay? So you kind of have a special, before you can get that to a normal court, you have to kind of separately, first of all, agree who the juristic persons are that are responsible for these things.
All right. So in the example which you also gave about a wife that receives money in case their signal is not sent, if she would be cheating on her husband, then she would still receive the money, or there would be another contract needed to verify.
Well, if he stops sending the signal, yes. So I hope that he is underfunding the contract between the two of us, but she's of course free. She is of course free to force him to, or to demand at the start of the agreement that that he should fund the contract's execution completely in advance. Okay. So if he funds the execution of the contract for the next 100 years in advance, and then there is no way for him to go back on that contract.
Right. Unless there will be another contract.
Well, no. So that contract cannot be modified.
But I mean, another contract now that his wife returns him money in case it's found out that she, I don't know, leaves him or cheats on him.
Yeah, so that would be, you might need but you would have to have specified that in advance in the smart contract that there's another procedure, or of course he can just go to a normal court and ask for the money back.
Understand. There's a question on the chat. Maybe I can read it. Have you seen examples in South Africa where government and private sector entities are using smart contracts to interact?
Basically, the ICORCA or ICORCA experiment of the Reserve Bank is like that. So I don't recall exactly whether there were smart contracts involved, but let's say it's very close. It's very close to that. Yeah, so I spoke a bit too quickly. I'm not sure whether the ICORCA experiment for electronic settlement system actually involved smart contracts that we're executing. Other than that, I can't think of something that I know of immediately.
All right, we have still some time for any other questions if anybody would like to ask.
I have a question.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Odongo, but my question has to do with the practical usage of these smart contracts. So I'll give an example. We know in corporate finance, for instance, that one of the main reasons that we have corporate governance problems is that we cannot be able to have complete contracts. So because of that, management is typically given the discretion to make decisions on behalf of owners of the company. And quite often, management has the temptation or has fallen to the temptation of making suboptimal decisions. And I believe that if we can be able to, approach complete contracting or a situation where we are almost attaining complete contracting, then perhaps we can be able to reduce incidences of corporate governance malfeasance. So my question is, can we be able, or to what extent can we be able to apply this concept that has ready usage in blockchain technology to real life situations like the one I've just described? Thank you.
So thank you for your question, Odongo. I should say, as an advisory, I'm generally a pessimistic person. So my immediate answer is, I think, very little. So there's not much that can be done to address this agency problem, but there are very many minor applications where the transparency and efficiency of blockchain can be very useful. To give you an example from my life, I'm now just at the end of a 2-month struggle to get a big South African corporate to pay me or to pay my company for a small job that I did for them. This is a situation which is very well defined. So there was an agreement at the beginning that they would pay me if it happens. There was an agreement on who should send the signal if it happens. And because of the amount involved, I think one other person had to approve it. Now, this is something which you could very easily specify on a smart contract. The execution, the signal of the persons responsible for verifying that I had, in fact, delivered on the agreement, and the person signing off shouldn't take more than seconds. And instead, this took 2 months of re-uploading documents, asking people, going onto the system, clicking here, clicking there. And this kind of inefficiency, in my view, is actually very conducive to fraud and other forms of malfeasance. So in terms of automating very simple agreements like this, I think that there's a great opportunity to use smart contracts. And in fact, I think a lot of agreements, so in this sense, you are absolutely correct. I think a lot of agreements would be much better if they were specified as smart contracts. And so these are really simple agreements which are very clear and can be very transparently handled if all parties agreed in advance, in effect, to how the agreement would be executed. So to give you an example of what I mean by irregularity that is encouraged by this kind of thing, at the end of last week, a person at this big corporate working in procurement very, very kindly, after finally solving the problem, offered to ask her supervisor to process the payment more quickly than would otherwise be required. So I am very appreciative of that, but if it was if the whole thing happened more efficiently, it would not be necessary to make this kind of exemption to the general rule. I think we should distinguish, and what blockchain makes very easy is to have things happen that only need to be verified later, that you don't need to, in that moment, decide on. You only need to know that you have a record that you can go check on later. Blockchain applications are fantastic for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Odongo.
Are there any other questions? Then feel free to ask. All right. If there are no other questions, then I would like to thank again Petrus for his presentation. And it will be available as well, as I said, on the website of ERSA. There's a YouTube channel. Otherwise, so I repeat what I said before, anybody that would like to present something, you are very much welcome to do so. And please follow the announcements for the trainings that will come this year.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.